The mountains are quiet tonight, but not silent. There's a difference, and the difference matters. The wind carries the scent of pine and cold earth. The stars hang sharp above the ridges, and far below, in a clearing wrapped in shadow, a single campfire glows like a beacon against the dark. Around it sit men and women who've carried more than packs on their backs, who've walked farther than the trails on any map. Veterans, bound not by uniforms anymore, but by promises they come here every year for reasons no tourist brochure could explain. To remember, to honor, to keep something alive that the world often forgets. But tonight, the quiet won't last tonight. Uninvited shadows will step into the light. Shadows that think they're hunting easy prey, unaware they've just walked into a circle of people who've stared down far worse than this. What follows will test every man and woman at that fire, and it will change the lives of more than just those who came looking for trouble. Before we step into this night, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below, and as you listen, picture this campfire in the mountains closest to you, burning in the heart of the dark. The fire crackled under a canopy of pines, throwing a warm glow on faces that had seen more of the world than they'd ever wanted to. It was late October, high in the Rockies, where the air thinned with each breath and the stars shone so sharp they felt like they could cut through the dark. 6 hikers sat in a loose circle, their boots dusty, their jackets weathered, and their eyes carrying the quiet weight of men and women who had once stood in places where survival wasn't just a matter of gear and maps not to a stranger. They were just another group of campers sharing stories by a fire. But to anyone who knew them, these weren't ordinary hikers. There was Sergeant Daniel Hawk Hawkins, tall and broad-shouldered, his beard flecked with gray, hands steady even when the wind bit hard. Beside him sat Corporal Maya Rivers, whose laugh was as quick as her reflexes, her hair pulled back into a braid that never seemed to loosen. On the other side of the fire, there was Vince Delgado, a quiet Marine sniper whose dark eyes rarely stopped scanning the tree line. And then there was Lieutenant Sam Grayson, the oldest among them, who had fought in wars before the others had even enlisted. They weren't here for glory or adventure, not anymore. This trip was their annual pact, a gathering that began years ago to remind each other they were still here, still breathing, still living. They'd all fought in different wars, but the same thread ran through each of them. They had lost friends, they had faced death, and they carried a promise to keep. Moving forward together, the firelight danced on their faces as Maya passed around a battered steel coffee pot, filling tin mugs. They talked about everything and nothing, about the stubborn elk tracks they'd followed earlier, about how Vince still made coffee strong enough to strip paint, about the way the mountains seemed to swallow all sound when the wind died. It was a night that felt safe, the kind where memories didn't hurt quite as much, the kind where laughter came easy. That was when Daniel froze mid-sentence, his gaze fixed beyond the flicker of the flames. He didn't say a word, but his sudden stillness made the others turn instinctively. Out there in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the campfire, shadows moved, slow, deliberate shapes, too close to be animals. Maya's hand slid to the knife on her belt without thinking. Vince's eyes narrowed, his posture shifting, calculating distances. Sam leaned forward slightly, his voice a low murmur that carried the edge of a man who'd been in this situation before. 3 figures stepped into the light, their boots crunching on fallen pine needles. They looked like trouble long before they spoke. The one in front, tall, wiry, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, had a rifle slung across his chest. The other 2 flanked him, one holding a baseball bat, the other a pistol loosely in hand. "Well, look what we found," the tall one said, his voice lazy, but carrying the kind of arrogance that came from thinking he owned the night. "Guess we stumbled onto the wrong campfire." Hawk's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Sounds like you mean the right one," he said. The outlaw's smirk widened. "That depends on whether you're feeling generous. Hand over your packs, your wallets, and maybe we'll let you keep your boots." No one moved. A fire popped loudly in the silence that followed. The veterans exchanged a glance, not of fear, but of quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. It was the same look they had shared in the moments before every fight they'd ever survived. Vince set his coffee mug down slowly, his movements deliberate. Maya's eyes flicked to Daniel, reading him like an open book. Sam exhaled once. Long and slow. The tall outlaw tilted his head, impatience creeping into his grin. Well, we don't have all night. Daniel's voice was steady, his words measured. Neither do we. What happened next would change the tone of the night entirely. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke, and with it came a tension, so thick it could be felt in the chest. The firelight flickered across the outlaws' faces, highlighting sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes, and the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. The leader shifted his weight, the rifle strap creaking slightly, a subtle reminder of the power he thought he held. But the veterans had seen this before, in alleys halfway across the world, in villages where smiles hid blades, in cities where danger came dressed in everyday clothes. They recognized the look in the outlaw's eyes, desperation wrapped in bravado, the kind of recklessness that made people dangerous. Maya was the first to speak, her voice level, but carrying an edge that could cut through steel. You sure you want to do this? She asked, as if she were offering them a choice instead of a warning. The man with the bat laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the trees. Lady, you think we're scared of a bunch of hikers? Vince's dark eyes stayed locked on him, measuring every twitch, every breath. In his mind, he was already calculating angles, distances, the time it would take to close the gap. The Marine in him never slept. Sam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his face unreadable. You picked the wrong campfire, he said quietly, almost like he was telling them a secret. The leader's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. You talk big. Let's see if you can back it up. He stepped closer, the rifle now hanging loose in front of him. His two companions followed, their shadows growing larger in the firelight. Daniel didn't stand. Not yet, he simply raised his voice slightly, enough to carry over the crackle of the fire. You know what's funny about this spot? 10 miles in any direction, no cell service, no law, no one to hear anything but the wind. Makes you think about who you want to cross. It was subtle, but it worked. The outlaw with the pistol glanced over his shoulder into the dark, just for a moment. That hesitation was a tell, and every veteran around the fire saw it. Maya shifted slightly, her foot pressing into the dirt in a way that told Daniel she was ready. Vince's hands were loose at his sides, but his body was coiled like a spring. Sam's gaze was steady, his heartbeat calm. The leader chuckled again, but it lacked the same easy arrogance. You're trying to scare us. Daniel finally stood, his full height casting a long shadow behind him. His voice dropped low, but it carried a weight that made the night feel smaller. If I was trying, you'd already be gone. The back wielding outlaw took a half step forward, maybe to prove he wasn't intimidated, maybe because he didn't realize yet just how dangerous this group was. His boot crunched on a twig, loud in the silence. Maya's hand brushed against her belt. Vince's eyes narrowed. Sam's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The leader opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, Daniel took a single step toward the fire, and the mood shifted entirely, because that was when the outlaws noticed something they hadn't seen before. The pile of gear behind the veterans wasn't just sleeping bags and cooking pans. It was heavier, harder, more. Intentional. The outlaw with the bat frowned, his eyes flicking toward the gear stacked just beyond the circle of firelight. His smirk faltered when he saw the shapes beneath the tarps, long, hard cases, their edges worn from travel but unmistakably military. Maya crouched by the pile, her movements slow, deliberate, like she wasn't in any rush because she already knew how this was going to end. She pulled back a tarp, revealing the matte black corner of a rifle case and the gleam of a field knife strapped to the outside. The man with the pistol shifted uneasily, his thumb brushing the safety without meaning to. Vince caught the motion. Instantly, his eyes narrowing, cataloging it. "You hikers pack heavy," the leader said, his voice trying to hold its earlier arrogance, but cracking just enough to betray the crack in his confidence. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the gear and lifted a long weathered case, resting it against his leg. With one motion, he popped the latches. The lid opened with a soft metallic click, and inside lay a suppressed marksman rifle, the kind only certain units carried, and the kind that looked out of place anywhere but on a battlefield. Maya glanced at Vince, who gave the slightest nod. No words were needed. They'd fought together long enough to speak in a language made entirely of looks and gestures. Sam finally stood, stretching his back like an old man in no hurry. But when his coat shifted, the firelight caught the edge of a patch sewn in two. The fabric, a unit insignia that had earned its reputation in some of the hardest fights overseas. The sight made the outlaw with the pistol look away fast, like he'd just realized he'd been staring into the wrong kind of eyes. Asterisk. "Let me make this real simple," Daniel said, his tone calm, controlled, but carrying that low vibration that could make the hair stand on the back of your neck. "You leave now, you walk out alive. You stay, and we find out what happens when the past comes knocking." Asterisk. The leader's jaw tightened, torn between pride and the primal instinct telling him he'd just walked into the kind of trouble that didn't end well. The bat-wielding outlaw tried to laugh it off, but it came out strained. "What are you? Some kind of ex-cops?" Maya's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "No," she said, her voice like steel under silk. "Much worse." The wind whistled through the pines again, carrying the kind of silence that wasn't empty at all. It was loaded, heavy with the knowledge that something could happen in the next breath. And then, somewhere deep in the dark beyond the campfire, a twig snapped. Not close, not too far either. A deliberate sound. The outlaws turned slightly, startled, but the veterans didn't, because they knew exactly who or what had just arrived. Asterisk. From the darkness beyond the circle of fire, a low voice broke the night, calm and measured like a hand settling on a rattlesnake before it could strike. "Daniel, everything good here?" The outlaws turned sharply, trying to track the voice, but the forest seemed to play tricks with sound. The firelight didn't reach far enough to see clearly, but shapes were moving between the trees, slow, steady, purposeful. A tall figure stepped into view, his silhouette broad and deliberate, a flashlight beam cutting across the outlaws' faces. He wore a battered field jacket and carried a shotgun cradled in his arms, like it was simply part of his body. Behind him came two more figures, one with a bow slung across her shoulder and a quiver strapped to her hip, the other carrying a heavy-duty pack that clinked faintly with every step. They moved with a coordination that didn't belong to casual hikers. The leader of the outlaws straightened, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Who the hell are you people?" The tall newcomer stopped just short of the firelight, letting the shadows play across his face. "Friends," he said simply, "of theirs." Maya's lips curved slightly, the barest hint of a smile. "Took you long enough," she said. The man with the bow, a wiry, quiet figure named Lena Torres, dropped her pack with a soft thud and began to methodically pull items from it. Rope, a small medical kit, 2 compact radios. She didn't look at the outlaws once, which somehow made the air feel even heavier. The tall man, Staff Sergeant Cole Barrett, retired, set the shotgun against a log and crouched by the fire. "We heard voices," he said, eyes flicking briefly toward the outlaws. Figured we'd see if you needed company. Daniel didn't take his eyes off the leader. They were just leaving. The leader laughed, but it was thinner now, fraying at the edges. You? Think a few more friends are going to scare us? Cole tilted his head, the faintest smile touching his mouth. No, he said. I think they're going to give you one last chance to make a smart decision. For the first time, the outlaws' confidence wavered in a way that couldn't be hidden. They weren't looking at hikers anymore. They were looking at a unit, a group of people who'd fought together before, who knew each other's strengths, who didn't need to talk to decide what came next. And somewhere deep down, the outlaws knew that men and women like this didn't bluff. A gust of wind hissed through the trees, rattling the pine needles overhead, and the fire gave a sudden flare, as if the night itself was holding its breath. That was when Vince spoke. For the first time, his voice low and certain. Last warning. A silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a countdown. Asterisk. The leader's smirk hardened into something colder, his pride refusing to back down in the face of quiet warnings. He shifted the rifle, the muzzle inching upward, and in that single movement, the decision was made. The man with the bat stepped forward first, swinging it lazily as if to intimidate, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The one with the pistol tightened his grip, his knuckles whitening. The leader took one more step toward the fire, and the tension in the air snapped like a wire, pulled too tight. Vince moved first, not rushing, not lunging, but flowing into motion the way water finds a crack. His boots scuffed the dirt as he angled toward the bat-wielding outlaw, his hand snapping up to grab the bat mid-swing. The motion was smooth and practiced, a disarm he'd done 100 times in training, but now it landed with the weight of necessity. At the same time, Maya stepped into the space between the leader and the fire, her body low, her stance solid. Her eyes never left the rifle, reading every twitch in his hands, every shift in his shoulders. Don't, she said, and her tone wasn't a plea, it was a command, the kind that could slice through a man's will. Cole didn't wait for the pistol to rise. His voice cut through the chaos, sharp and clear. Sam. And then Sam Grayson, old, deliberate Sam, moved with the speed of a man 30 years younger. His hand closed around the outlaw's wrist, twisting in a way that made the pistol clatter to the dirt. The outlaw cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the hiss of the wind and the crackle of the fire. The leader froze, the rifle halfway raised, his eyes darting between the people who now controlled the ground around him. He wasn't surrounded by hikers anymore. He was standing inside the ring of something much older, much sharper. A team that didn't just know how to fight, but how to end a fight before it began. Last chance, Daniel said again, his voice quieter now, almost like he was giving the man a way out. Walk. But pride is a stubborn enemy. The leader's jaw clenched, his knuckles tightening on the rifle. His decision was written in his posture, in the narrowing of his eyes. And then, from the edge of the trees, Lena Torres drew her bowstring back, the arrows fletching whispering against her cheek. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The point of the arrow hovered just below the outlaw's collarbone. The firelight gleaming off the steel tip. Everything stopped. The rifle lowered an inch. The leader's eyes flicked toward Lena, then back to Daniel. The fire popped loudly, sending a spray of sparks into the cold night air. Your call, Daniel said. The leader's lip curled, torn between backing down and making the kind of mistake you don't walk away from. And then, somewhere in the dark, a distant sound reached all of them, one that made even the veterans glance at each other. An engine. More than one. Asterisk, the low rumble of engines grew louder, bouncing between the trees, like rolling thunder. It wasn't the steady hum of a lone pickup or the whining buzz of an ATV. This was heavier, deeper, the kind of sound that rattled the earth just enough to feel in your boots. The Outlaws' leader stiffened, his head snapping toward the darkness. His companions shifted nervously, eyes darting between the veterans and the unseen approach. Daniel's gaze didn't leave the leader, but his ears were tuned to the sound, reading it like a familiar language. "Not yours?" he asked quietly. The leader's silence was answer enough. Cole's posture shifted, the old instincts coming alive. He stepped toward the shadows beyond the fire, shotgun loose in his hands but ready, scanning the tree line. "There, not coming slow," he said under his breath. Maya's eyes narrowed as she caught the flicker of headlights cutting through the trees in the distance, weaving between trunks. Whoever was coming knew the terrain, or they were reckless enough not to care. The sound split into two distinct growls, one higher-pitched, the other deep and steady. Bikes, maybe more. The leader cursed under his breath, his earlier arrogance, leaking out in a thin trail of fear. "We need to move," he muttered to his crew. But Vince stepped into his path, blocking the way with a stance that made it clear they weren't leaving just yet. "Not until we know who's rolling in," Vince said, his voice low, even, and final. Sam's gaze swept the darkness, and then his expression changed, not fear, but recognition. "I'll be damned," he murmured. The first bike burst into the glow of the firelight, its rider leaning low over the handlebars. A broad man with a weathered face and a beard streaked with silver swung the bike to a stop in the dirt, killing. The engine in one smooth motion. His leather jacket carried a patch that caught the firelight, not a gang emblem, but a faded military insignia stitched carefully over the heart. Two more riders followed, their engines cutting as they rolled. In. The veterans relaxed by degrees, but the Outlaws went rigid. "Evening," the lead rider said, voice deep and steady, eyes scanning the scene in one slow sweep. "Looks like we arrived just in time." Daniel allowed the faintest smile. "You're late, Mike?" Mike swung a leg over his bike and stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the dirt. "You looked like you had things handled," he said, but his tone carried the weight of a man who knew just how fast things could change. The Outlaws took a step back without even realizing it, their bravado thinning like smoke in the cold air. Because now the Campfire wasn't just surrounded by veterans. It was surrounded by brothers and sisters who had bled together, on and off the battlefield. And the night had just become very small for anyone who meant harm. Mike's boots carried him right into the circle of firelight, and for a moment the night seemed to pause, the shadows leaning in to watch what would happen next. He gave Daniel a brief nod, then glanced at Maya, Vince, and Sam in turn, as if checking to see if anyone was hurt. No words were needed. He could read the air like a weathered map behind him. The other two riders stepped forward. One was a tall woman with cropped hair and a jaw set like carved stone, her leather jacket patched with a medic's cross. The other was a stocky man with eyes sharp as broken glass, his posture loose but ready. The way they moved said it all. These weren't weekend bikers. These were veterans who had traded uniforms for leather, but had never lost the old discipline. The Outlaws shifted uneasily, caught between the firelight and the expanding wall of muscle, skill, and experience. Closing around them, the leader's eyes darted to the tree line, but the darkness beyond seemed thicker now, less inviting. Mike spoke without raising his voice, but every syllable landed heavy. "I don't know who you are, but you're standing in the middle of something you don't understand." He tilted his head toward Daniel. "These folks, they've seen more than you can imagine. And me? I've seen what happens when people like you don't listen." The man with the bat took a step back, his grip loosening slightly. The one with the pistol had gone pale, his earlier bravado draining away with every heartbeat. But the leader held on, clinging to the last scraps of his pride. You think just because you're a bunch of vets, we're supposed to be scared? He said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Maya stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. Not supposed to be scared, she said softly. Supposed to be smart. Cole's voice came from behind the leader, calm and certain. You've got maybe 30 seconds before you cross the line, or walking away stops being an option. The leader turned sharply to look at him, and that was his mistake. In that moment, Vince closed the gap, stepping in so fast it seemed like he'd vanished from his spot near the fire. In one clean motion, he plucked the rifle from the leader's hands, pivoted, and passed it to Mike without even breaking stride. Mike caught it effortlessly, turned it over once in his hands, and then tossed it to Lena, who slung it behind her without ceremony. That's one problem solved, Mike said, his tone almost casual. The bat clattered to the dirt next. Courtesy of a precise kick from Maya, it sent it spinning harmlessly out of reach. The pistol followed, plucked from trembling fingers by Sam with all the ease of a man taking a toy from a child. The outlaws were suddenly unarmed, standing in the glow of the fire, their chests rising and falling too fast. And in the silence that followed, the only sounds were the wind in the pines and the slow, deliberate steps of veterans closing in from all sides. For the first time that night, the balance of power had shifted entirely. The leader's defiance faltered as Mike's shadow fell across him, the firelight painting deep lines across a face suddenly stripped of confidence. His companions stood frozen, their hands empty, their eyes darting like cornered animals. The cold reality had set in. They were surrounded, outmatched, and no longer in control. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, but carrying that steel edge that cut through the air. Sit, he said, motioning to a patch of dirt opposite the fire. It wasn't a suggestion. The three outlaws hesitated, exchanging nervous glances, but the wall of veterans didn't move, didn't blink. The pressure was too much. One by one, they sank to the ground, the firelight flickering over their uneasy faces. Maya crouched near them, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. You should count yourself lucky, she said, her tone even. A different campfire, a different night, and you wouldn't be breathing right now. Sam lowered himself onto a log, the way only an old soldier can, slow, deliberate, but still with that underlying readiness. We didn't come up here to fight, he said, his gaze never leaving the leader. We came here to remember. The leader frowned, thrown off by the shift in tone. Remember what? Mike answered for him, his voice low. The people who didn't make it back. The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks into the night. The weight of the words settled over the clearing like a blanket, heavy and still. Daniel turned toward the pile of gear and pulled out a folded flag, its edges worn but carefully kept. He set it gently on the log beside him. Every year we come here for them, he said, nodding toward the flag. For the names we still carry, for the ones we couldn't save. The outlaws shifted uncomfortably, unused to the kind of silence. That made a man look at himself. Lena came forward, placing a small tin on the ground. She opened it to reveal brass shell casings, each one marked with a name scratched into the metal. We take turns telling their stories, she said quietly. Because if we don't, they fade. The leader's eyes flicked from the flag to the casings, to the faces around the fire. Something in his posture loosened, just barely. Maya studied him closely. You think you know about toughness, she said. But real toughness isn't about swinging a bat or pointing a gun. It's about what you can carry without letting it break you. The firelight caught in Vince's eyes as he spoke for the first time since the standoff ended. You wandered into the wrong campfire, he said, but maybe the right story. The leader didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. And in the woods beyond, the night seemed to lean closer, listening. The fire crackled softly as Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, the folded flag just beside him. He stared into the flames for a moment, as if pulling a memory from the embers, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but laced with the weight of years. "First time I saw combat," he began, "it was in a valley that smelled like diesel and dust. We'd been told it was a routine patrol. Nothing routine about walking into an ambush." He paused, his gaze fixed on the fire, the flicker reflecting in his eyes. 3 men didn't make it back that day. One of them was my best friend. We'd grown up together. He wanted to be a teacher when he got out. The leader shifted slightly, but didn't speak. The bat-wielder stared into the fire like he could see something in it, something far away. Maya took over next, her voice softer but no less sharp. "My last deployment, I was on convoy duty. We hit an IED outside Kandahar. I woke up under a flipped Humvee, pinned, couldn't move. Thought I was done. Then I saw Sergeant Lee crawling toward me through the smoke. He got me out, but he didn't make it. I keep his dog tags with me, always." She touched the chain under her jacket. Her expression unreadable. Vince spoke without looking at the outlaws, his tone matter-of-fact. "Sniper overwatch on a supply route. Spent 2 days without moving, watching the road. One guy, just one, came to plant a mine, took the shot. That mine would have torn apart a bus full of kids the next day. Didn't feel like a win. Still doesn't." Lena leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her voice low enough that the outlaws had to lean in to hear. "Medic unit in Fallujah. I've seen people hold themselves together, literally, just long enough to say goodbye to their friends. You learn quick what real strength looks like. And it's not standing over someone smaller with a gun." The night had grown quieter, the forest listening as much as the outlaws were. The bravado that had been on their faces earlier was gone, replaced by something else. Not guilt, not yet, but the first flickers of understanding. Sam took a slow breath. "We don't tell these stories for us," he said. "We tell them so the people we lost don't disappear, so they don't just become names on a wall somewhere." The leader's gaze dropped to the dirt, his jaw working as if chewing on something he couldn't swallow. The man with the pistol rubbed his hands together unconsciously, as if trying to warm them. Though the fire was right there, Daniel reached for the tin of shell casings and set it between them. "Each one of these has a name," he said. "Men and women we'd give anything to have back. You think your choices tonight are just about you, but they're not. Every choice you make ripples out. Every choice leaves a mark." The fire popped again, sending a spray of sparks skyward, and for a moment no one spoke at all. It was the kind of silence that could change a man if he let it. Asterisk. The leader sat still for a long moment, the flickering fire painting lines across his face that made him look older than he had an hour ago. His hands, once so sure on the grip of that rifle, were now loosely clasped between his knees. The others stared into the flames, each lost in a different place. Finally, the one with the pistol, a lean man with hollow cheeks and restless eyes, cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness it was enough to draw every gaze toward him. He hesitated under the weight of that attention, shifting uncomfortably, but something in the veteran's quiet patience seemed to hold him there. "My brother." He started, then stopped, like the words were caught in his throat. He stared at the dirt, not meeting anyone's eyes. He served Army. 2 tours. When he came back, he wasn't the same. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't be around people. I didn't get it. I thought he was just weak. He swallowed hard, his voice rough. One night he called me, said he couldn't do it anymore. I told him to get over it. That was the last time we talked. Next day, he trailed off, the rest hanging in the air unspoken but heavy enough to be felt. The fire crackled softly, the only sound for several heartbeats. Maya's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You carry that weight every day, don't you?" He nodded slowly, still not looking up. "Yeah, I guess. I've been angry at everyone since. Then, figured if I could push hard enough, hit first, maybe no one could hurt me like that again." Lena leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "You've been fighting the wrong fight," she said gently, "and all it's done is make the hurt bigger." The man with the bat shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the fire and his leader. His voice was gruff when it came, like he was embarrassed to be speaking at all. "My old man was a Marine. Never let me forget I didn't measure up. I thought if I could run with guys who weren't afraid of anything, maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere." Mike's gaze was steady, almost clinical. "And you feel like you belong?" The man's jaw tightened. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. The leader still hadn't spoken, but his eyes were fixed on the flag beside Daniel, his expression unreadable. Daniel didn't push. He just sat there, letting the weight of the night and the stories settle in. Because he knew, they all knew, that sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come from what you say, but from giving someone the space to hear themselves. In that quiet, the forest seemed to close in just a little tighter, holding them all in its dark, watchful embrace. The leader sat rigid, his shoulders squared like he was still holding up an invisible weight. The firelight traced hard lines across his face, catching the slight twitch in his jaw every time someone else spoke. He hadn't said a word since they sat down, but now his eyes stayed locked on the folded flag beside Daniel, as if it had been calling to him the whole time. Finally, he exhaled, long and slow, like a man deciding whether or not to take a step over a line he'd drawn for himself years ago. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he said quietly, his voice almost lost to the wind. Mike leaned slightly forward, not pressing, just listening. The leader's gaze didn't move from the fire. 2 weeks ago, my younger cousin shipped out. Marines. First deployment. Before he left, he asked me to watch over his mom. I told him I would, swore it. He swallowed hard, the firelight catching the faint sheen in his eyes. Then I blew. It got caught up with these two, chasing quick cash and trying to prove I was still in control of my life. I was supposed to be the one keeping trouble away from my family, not bringing it to their doorstep. Maya tilted her head, her voice calm but steady. "So instead, you came looking for trouble out here." He nodded slightly, shame pulling at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, figured if I could. I don't know. Feel strong again. I wouldn't have to think about how bad I'd messed up." Vince's voice cut through the quiet, low and even. "Strength isn't about making yourself dangerous to strangers. It's about making yourself worth trusting to the people who matter." The leader glanced at him, something flickering behind his eyes. Not defiance, not yet surrender, but maybe the first crack in the armor he'd been wearing for years. Sound's tone softened, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen this same story in a dozen faces before. "You think you're too far gone. But I've seen men crawl out of darker places than this. I've seen them come back better. Not for themselves, but for the people who needed them." The leader's gaze dropped to the dirt. His hands flexed once, then stilled. "My cousin wrote me a letter before he left," he murmured. "Haven't opened it yet. Didn't feel like I deserved to." Daniel's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a clear path through fog. "Maybe it's time you did." The leader looked at him for the first time, and in his eyes there was something raw, not anger, not bravado, but the fragile edge of a man trying to remember who he used to be before he lost himself. And around them, the veterans didn't move, didn't speak. They just let the fire hold the silence. Because sometimes that's what it takes for a man to decide which way he's going to walk. Asterisk Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his eyes steady on the leader. The firelight caught in them, not just as reflection, but as something deeper, the same light he'd carried through every mission, every loss, every time he'd had to make the kind of decision that stuck with a man for the rest of his life. You want to walk out of here tonight, he said evenly. You can, but it's not going to be free. The leader's brow furrowed, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. You want money? Mike shook his head, the corner of his mouth pulling into something halfway between a smirk and a warning. We don't need your money. We need something worth more than that. Maya gestured toward the folded flag and the tin of shell casings. We come up here every year for them, the people we lost. They gave everything they had for something bigger than themselves. You want to walk away? You're going to give something too. Something real. The man with the pistol glanced between them uneasily. Like what? Vince's gaze was like steel. You're going to change. And you're going to prove it. Not to us. To the people you've hurt. To the people you've neglected. And you're going to start now. Lena spoke up from her place near the fire, her voice calm but carrying an unshakable certainty. You're going to take that letter from your cousin and you're going to read it. You're going to let his words burn through whatever's been keeping you in this hole you've dug. Then you're going to make good on the promise you broke. The leader looked between them, jaw working, pride and fear warring behind his eyes. And if I don't? Cole stepped closer, his shadow falling across the man's knees. Then you walk out of here tonight, knowing you stared down a dozen people who could have ended this in 5 seconds. And you chose to keep living like you're already dead inside. His voice didn't rise, but the words hit like a hammer. This man with the bat shifted, his eyes on the dirt. And what if we weren't out to? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam's gaze softened just slightly. Then you walk the same road. Different reasons, maybe, but the same road. You either put down the weight you've been carrying wrong, or it's going to bury you. The fire popped, sending a swirl of sparks up into the dark. The leader sat, in silence, his hands flexing once, twice, before finally reaching into his jacket pocket. When his hand came out, there was a crumpled, unopened envelope resting in his palm. The night went still. The leader stared at the letter in his hand like it was something alive, something that might bite if he got too close. The edges were worn from weeks of being carried, but never opened. The paper soft from the heat of his jacket pocket. No one spoke. The veterans simply watched, their faces steady in the firelight, the kind of quiet that didn't push but held firm, leaving him with no place to hide. Finally, with a slow breath, he slid a rough thumb under the flap and tore it open. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt loud enough to echo off the trees. He unfolded the paper, his hands trembling just enough to betray the weight of what he was about to face. His voice was rough at first, catching on the first few words. Hey, Jake. If you're reading this, I guess I'm already gone for a while. He swallowed and kept going, his tone uneven. I know we haven't been close these last few years. You've had your life. I've had mine. But I want you to know, I've always looked up to you, even when you didn't think I did. The fire popped, but no one moved. Jake's eyes darted over the lines, the words dragging something raw out of him. Mom worries about you. She says you've been carrying too much alone. I get that. I'm about to do the same. But promise me one thing. Don't waste your fight on the wrong battles. There's enough out there worth protecting. His voice broke on the next line, and for a moment he just stared at the paper, breathing hard, before forcing himself to finish. If I don't make it back, I need to know you'll be the man I always thought you were. Take care of her. And take care of yourself. You're stronger than you think." He lowered the letter, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. The firelight caught the sheen in his eyes, but he didn't bother wiping it away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but certain. "He believes you can be that man. The only question is whether you're going to believe it too." Jake's fingers closed around the letter, crumpling it slightly. His head dropped, and when he spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "I've been fighting the wrong fight for a long time." Mike nodded once, then stopped. Tonight, even the forest seemed to shift. The wind easing through the pines like the mountains themselves had been listening. Daniel straightened, his gaze sweeping over all three outlaws, lingering on each one long enough to make sure they understood. This wasn't just talk. "You've got a window right now," he said, voice steady. "A chance to turn around before the road you're on locks you in for good. But it's not about walking away from trouble. It's about walking toward something worth protecting." Jake, the leader, glanced at his two companions, but neither met his eyes. The man with the pistol stared into the fire like it might hold the answer, while the bat-wielder rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. His earlier swagger nowhere to be found. Mike stepped in, his boots crunching softly on the dirt. "You want to make it right? Then you start with the people closest to you. That means going back to your cousin's mom, not with excuses, not with promises, but with actions she can see. Pay her bills, fix her roof, whatever it takes to show you've got her back." Maya's tone sharpened, just enough to cut through any lingering haze. "And you," she said, nodding toward the man with the pistol, "you've been carrying your brother's ghost like a punishment. You want to honor him? Volunteer at a vet center. Help someone who's still fighting the battles he couldn't. Win. Make sure no one else's call goes unanswered." Lena leaned in, her gaze locking on the bat-wielder. "You don't measure yourself by your old man standards anymore. You make your own. That starts with walking into a youth center or a boxing gym and teaching kids discipline before they end up on the wrong side of a fire like this one." The bat-wielder frowned, but it wasn't resistance. It was the look of someone imagining a life he'd never let himself picture. Sam's voice was quieter, but it carried. "You're not going to fix everything in a night, but you can take the first step before you walk away from this fire. The first step's always the hardest. You take it, you keep taking it, and one day you'll look back and realize you've walked yourself out of the place you swore you'd never leave." Jake's jaw flexed. His grip on the letter tightened, the paper creasing under his fingers. "And if we do this? If we really try, what then?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then you come back here next year, not as the guys who stumbled into the wrong campfire, but as the ones who decided to change at the right one." The fire cracked again, sending sparks spiraling into the cool night air. Jake looked around the circle, at the faces lit in gold and shadow, at the folded flag, at the tin of names, and for the first time, his voice was steady. "All right, we start tonight." Daniel didn't smile, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, the kind that came when a man recognized a turning point worth marking. He reached for the tin of shell casings, the metal warm from sitting close to the fire. With a practiced motion, he pulled one casing free and held it out toward Jake. "This isn't for decoration," Daniel said. "It's a name, a life, a reminder. You carry it until you've earned the right to pass it on. When you do, you give it to someone who needs the same chance you're getting tonight." Jake stared at the casing in Daniel's open palm. The brass gleamed faintly in the firelight, and in its reflection, he saw more than just metal. He saw a responsibility, small enough to fit in his hand, but heavy enough to anchor a man's choices. Slowly, he reached out and took it, curling his fingers around it like it was fragile. Mike stepped forward next, producing a folded strip of cloth from his jacket pocket. It was a narrow piece of an old unit flag, frayed at the edges, but still strong. "We cut this years ago," Mike said. "Gave one piece to every man and woman in our crew. Not for show. For connection. You keep it. You're part of something. Bigger than yourself." He handed it to Jake without ceremony, and Jake accepted it with the same quiet reverence. Maya looked at the man with the pistol, her gaze steady. She reached for the chain around her neck, unclipping a small, battered dog tag from the rest. "Sergeant Lee," she said. "He saved my life, and he'd want this to save someone else's. You carry it until you've done something that makes you believe you deserved it." The man took it in both hands, his expression unguarded now, a raw mix of humility and something. Close to gratitude, Lena turned to the bat wielder and pressed a length of paracord into his palm. "You think it's just rope, but with enough of it, you can pull someone out of a flood, tie down a broken load, or keep a man from falling. Use it for good, and it'll remind you that you're built to hold things together, not break them apart." The night air seemed sharper now, the stars brighter overhead, as if the mountains themselves were watching. Sam stood, and for the first time that night, his voice carried the weight of ceremony. "From this moment on, what you do is on you. No more excuses. You leave here tonight with something worth carrying. Don't let it burn out in the morning light." The veterans, one by one, extended their hands across the fire. Jake and his crew reached forward, gripping them firmly. It wasn't a handshake of strangers. It was a seal, a pact, bound not by law but by choice. The fire popped again, and the circle felt smaller, tighter, like something solid had formed there. Under the stars. Daniel reached behind the pile of gear and pulled out a small, weathered rucksack. Its canvas was worn smooth in places. The color faded from years of sun and rain, but the straps were still strong. He set it on the ground between them. "This was mine," he said simply. "Carried it through 2 deployments, a dozen countries, and more nights like this than I can count. It's not for show. It's for work. You're going to fill it with what matters, tools, food, whatever your people need. And you're going to keep it full." Jake stared at the bag, then back at Daniel. He didn't reach for it right away. Like he understood taking it meant more than just accepting a gift. Finally, he nodded once firm and slung it over his shoulder. Mike stepped over to his bike and pulled a small black notebook from one of the saddlebags. The leather cover was scratched, the edges softened with time. He handed it to the man with the pistol. "Write in it," he said. "Not for us, for yourself. Every time you choose something better than what you'd have done before, you put it in here. It's proof you're not the same man you were tonight." The man took it, holding it carefully, almost like he was afraid to bend the pages. Lena reached into her pack and produced a compact first aid kit. Nothing fancy, but solid and complete. She pressed it into the bat wielder's hands. "You've been swinging that thing to hurt people. Now you've got something that can save them. Keep it with you, and use it when the moment comes. And trust me, it will come." The bat wielder nodded, closing his fingers around the kit with surprising care. Cole walked a slow circle around the 3 men, his eyes locking with each of theirs in turn. "You're going to leave this fire and walk into a dark forest. And tomorrow, you're going to walk into a world that doesn't care about the promises you made here. That's when it's going to count. Not tonight, when it's easy. Tomorrow. Next week. A year from now." Sam stepped forward last, his old boots silent on the dirt. "When the night gets heavy," he said, "remember the heat of this fire and the eyes of the people who saw you make this choice. We'll remember you. Whether that's as men who rose to the moment or as ones who let it die, that's on you." The veterans stepped back, leaving a clear path out of the firelight. Jake looked at his 2 friends, then back at the circle. "We'll be back," he said quietly, The kind of promise a man only makes when he knows it's going to cost him something to keep it. They stepped into the shadows, their shapes fading into the dark between the trees. And from the edge of the clearing, just before they disappeared completely, Jake's voice came back through the night. "Thank you." The forest felt different now, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the outlaws being gone. The night air seemed cleaner, the fire's glow warmer, though the flames were smaller than before. The veterans eased back into their places around the circle, the leather of jackets creaking, the crunch of boots on pine needles the only sound for a few moments. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes still fixed on the path the three men had taken into the dark. "You think they'll keep their word?" he asked, though his voice didn't carry doubt, just curiosity. Mike settled onto a log, pulling off his gloves. "Some will," he said. "Maybe all. Depends on what they wake up feeling tomorrow morning. Depends on whether tonight sticks when the world starts pushing back." Maya leaned back against her pack, hands wrapped loosely around her mug of cooling coffee. Sometimes all it takes is one night, one conversation, one person who doesn't give up on you when you've already given up on yourself. Vince nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "Yeah, but sometimes it takes 100. Nights like this before a man stops lying to himself." Lena glanced at the folded flag and the tin of shell casings, her voice soft but steady. Either way, they left with something worth carrying. And if they're smart, they'll understand that's heavier than anything they walked in with. "Cool," chuckled, the sound low and tired. "You know, I've been part of firefights that felt less tense than that standoff." Sam gave a quiet grin. "That's because bullets are simple. People, they're complicated." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending a small spray of sparks upward. "But the complicated ones are usually worth the trouble." For a while, no one spoke. They just sat with the fire, listening to the wind going through the pines, the occasional snap of a log breaking in the coals, the kind of silence that felt earned. Finally, Daniel leaned back and exhaled, his voice quieter now. "We keep doing this every year for them," he said, nodding at the flag. "But maybe, just maybe, nights like this mean we're doing it for the living too." No one argued. The thought hung there, warm as the fire, until the night took it and carried it into the trees. The fire had burned lower, its glow now a steady bed of orange coals, when a faint sound drifted in from the far side of the ridge. It wasn't the rumble of engines this time, nor the heavy tread of boots on dry needles. It was softer, irregular, like branches snapping under careful feet. Vince was the first to notice, his head turning slightly, eyes narrowing toward the sound. "We've got movement," he murmured, his voice low but carrying to every ear. In the circle, the veterans didn't scramble or panic. They shifted subtly, each one falling into an old rhythm. Maya reached for her knife. Cole eased the shotgun into his lap. Lena's fingers found the bowstring without thinking. Daniel stayed still, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Not rushing," he said under his breath. "They're feeling us out." Sound came again. 2 quick steps, then silence, then another faint crack farther left. Whoever it was, they knew how to move without being seen. Mike stood slowly, scanning the tree line. "Could be elk," he said, though there was no conviction in his tone. A shadow appeared between 2 pines, then slipped away as quickly as it came. "Not elk," Lena whispered out from the darkness. A voice called out, hesitant but not hostile. "Hello? Is the fire still going?" The veterans exchanged quick glances. The voice was younger, maybe late teens, early 20s. It carried a tremor, the kind that came from more than just the cold. Daniel rose to his feet, stepping toward the edge of the firelight. "Depends who's asking," he called back, his tone steady. A figure emerged slowly from the trees, A young man, thin under an oversized hoodie, a pack hanging awkwardly from one shoulder. His face was pale, eyes wide, scanning the group, like he'd just stumbled into the middle of something far bigger than he'd expected. "I saw the fire from the ridge," he said. "Didn't mean to bother anyone. I just didn't want to be out here alone tonight." The veterans held their silence for a beat, measuring him the way they'd measured the outlaws earlier. But this time, the air didn't tighten. It softened, just slightly. Sam's voice broke the quiet, calm and warm. "Son, you hungry?" The young man's relief was visible in the slump of his shoulders. Yeah, I am." Daniel stepped aside, motioning toward the circle. "Then, pull up a seat. You're in good company." The young man stepped into the circle of firelight, his eyes adjusting slowly as he took in the faces around him. He seemed unsure where to sit until Maya slid her pack aside and nodded toward the empty space beside her. He dropped his worn-out pack to the ground, rubbing his hands near the flames as if he hadn't felt warmth in days. Cole passed him a steaming tin mug without a word, and the kid's hands wrapped around it gratefully. He took a sip, wincing at the heat and letting it settle. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice still carrying that edge of exhaustion. Daniel studied him for a moment. "You alone out here?" The young man nodded. "Yeah, been hiking since. Yesterday morning. Thought I knew the trail, but I got turned around. Lost my phone signal. Ran out of food. I figured I'd just keep moving until I saw lights." He hesitated, glancing at the folded flag on the log. "Didn't think I'd find this." Maya followed his gaze. "What's your name?" "Evan," he said. "Evan Carter." The name landed with an unexpected weight. Sam's head tilted, his brow furrowing. "Carter? You from Montana?" Evan's eyes widened. "Yeah. How do you—" Sam leaned back slightly, studying him. "You got a grandfather named Walter Carter?" Evan's shoulders straightened. "Yeah. You knew him?" A ripple of recognition passed through the circle. Sam's voice softened, but it carried a kind of reverence. "Knew him? Your grandfather was my CO in '74. Best damn leader I ever had. Saved my life more than once." Evan blinked, his mouth opening but no words coming. He used to tell me stories about some of his men. I didn't think they were real." "They were real," Sam said, a faint smile touching his lips. "And if he could see you out here wandering around half frozen, he'd have my hide for not making sure you were taken care of." Evan let out a shaky laugh, the tension easing from his frame. "Guess I picked the right campfire then." Daniel glanced at the others, his expression unreadable. "Seems like the fire picked you." The veterans shifted subtly, the earlier heaviness replaced with a quiet hum of connection. It wasn't lost on anyone. The night had brought the wrong people to their fire once already, but now it had brought someone who clearly belonged. Evan sat a little straighter now, the firelight catching the faint color returning to his face. The veterans moved around him with the ease of people who knew exactly how to take care of someone without making a show of it. Maya handed him a plate of food. Vince shifted his own seat so the wind wouldn't hit the kid directly. Lena quietly draped an extra blanket across his shoulders. Sam was watching him closely, not with suspicion, but with the quiet study of a man seeing more than just the surface. "Your grandfather. He had this way of finding people before they found themselves," Sam said. "Looks like you inherited that same stubborn spark he had. Might just need the right hands to shape it." Evan glanced around the circle, his voice quieter now. "I've been drifting, I guess. Not sure what I want to do. My mom keeps saying I should figure out who I am before I figure out where I'm going. I thought maybe hiking would help me think. Didn't expect to end up here." Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Life's funny like that. Sometimes the trail you think you're on isn't the one you needed. It's just the one that gets you where you belong. Daniel studied Evan for a long moment before speaking. You've got two choices tonight. You can warm up, eat, and head back down the mountain in the morning. Or you can stick with us for a while. See what we're about. Learn the kind of lessons your grandfather would have wanted you to learn firsthand. Evan looked from face to face, reading the unspoken offer. This wasn't just about camping. It was about stepping into something bigger, something real. His grip on the mug tightened. I think I'd like to stay. For a while. Maya smiled faintly, the firelight catching in her eyes. Then you're one of us for as long as you can keep up. The circle closed in just a little, the conversation turning easier, warmer. The earlier tension of the night seemed like a shadow far down the trail, replaced by the glow of something steadier. The folded flag still sat in its place, a tin of shell casings beside it, reminders of the past, but now also anchors for the future. As the fire burned low and the stars turned overhead, Daniel glanced into the dark beyond the clearing. Somewhere out there, 3 men were walking into a new life, carrying the weight and hope the veterans had given them. And here, at this same fire, a new story was beginning. He leaned back, the blanket of night pressing close, and let the thought settle in. Every year they came here for the ones they lost, but maybe the real purpose was to be ready when the call says. Right ones found their way in. The coals glowed deep into the night, holding the heat, holding the promise. And around them, the mountains kept their watch,